Hi guys, we're going to be doing lesson 2, which is the Eastern Woodlands. We've officially started the different Native American groups now. On page 62, which you were looking at here, shows you the lesson, what to know, how did the geography and the climate of the Eastern Woodlands affect the Native Americans there, our vocabulary that's going to be in this lesson, the people, and then the places would be the Great Lakes. So like I told you last time, each lesson sets up with the "you are there." So imagine playing a ball game with other Iroquois children. You scoop up the ball in the small leather basket at the end of your stick and run toward the other team's goal. Darting past the other children, you make your way down the long playing field. As you fling the ball toward the goal, your heart races with excitement. Your skillful play will bring honor to you and your family. Score. So I'll show you what the picture at the bottom looks like here. Okay. And then they have these little like fast facts. The game that they are describing is obviously a game the Native Americans played, but it sounds similar to a game that is still played today. Lacrosse, as it is played today, is much like the game played by the Iroquois. Lacrosse players use a stick with nets on one end so that the teammates can pass the ball to each other. So this is a similar game as lacrosse. On the next page, we have this picture at the top. Oops. And the caption reads, "The Eastern Woodlands, the many forests of this region provided people with wood that was used to make homes and tools." Okay, life in the Eastern Woodlands. The Eastern Woodlands cultural region stretched east of the Mississippi River. The region's name came from the thick forest that once covered this land. The Eastern Woodlands people built their villages along the banks of the many rivers and streams flowing through the forest. So when we are looking at, see if I can find us a map of just the United States. Come on. Okay. So if we are looking at a map of the United States, so I picked a physical map because it shows the mountains and the rivers. They were saying that the woodlands, let's go back here, and it says the Eastern Woodlands region stretched east of the Mississippi River. So if I go to the United States map, and I find the Mississippi River, which it runs right down here, down the side of Illinois, down Mississippi and Louisiana, all the way out to Gulf of Mexico. So from here over would be east, okay? So the Eastern Woodlands were anywhere from the Mississippi River and then towards the Atlantic Ocean or this coastline. So from here to here, you're covering the Eastern Woodlands. Put a little post-it in there so I remember that page in case I need it again. Okay, a common resource. Different groups of Native Americans lived in the Eastern Woodlands. However, they all shared an important natural resource, trees. They used trees to make canoes and shelters, and they carved tools and weapons from wood. Trees also gave the people food, such as cherries and plums. The Eastern Woodland people were farmers as well as hunters and gatherers. In the northeastern part of the woodlands, where the soil was rocky, people did more hunting and gathering than farming. Jobs were divided between men and women. The men hunted animals for food and used antlers and bones to make tools. Using spears and nets, they fished in the region's many lakes and rivers. The women prepared the food and used animal skins to make clothing, moccasins. This division of labor made it possible for people to produce more goods. So you have their natural resources. Each Native American group uses a certain natural resource, which means something that's naturally made, okay, something found in nature that's naturally produced. So their resource was trees. Because they're in the woodlands or the forest, they have the use of the trees, and they can use the trees for many things. Canoes, shelter, tools, weapons, okay? Then also because they're in the forest, they have a lot more variety of animals that they can hunt, okay? So the men and the women divide up their labor, or they divide the work. The men are known to do the hunting for the animals, And then the women are known to do preparing of the food and basically using the animal skins to make clothing. In the southern areas of the eastern woodlands, the soil and the climate were better for farming. The people in this area grew corn, beans, squash, and other plants. Usually the men cleared the land for planting, and the women and the children did the planting and the harvesting of the crops. Again, you have a division of labor here. The men would do the clearing of the land. So before you can farm a land, you have to clear it, okay? Or sometimes we call it till it, like there's those, we have those machines now that will till the soil. Then the women and the children were the ones that went through and planted the crops, and they also harvest them when they were ready. And now they're going to go into some specific groups of people. The first group is going to be the Iroquois. The Native Americans of the Eastern Woodlands cultural region included two main language groups, the Algonquian and the Iroquoian. Most of the people who spoke Algonquian languages lived on the coastal plain. Most Iroquoian-speaking people lived farther inland. So, when they're talking about where they lived, if we go back to the map here, okay, if we're saying that they lived from between here and here, what they're saying is that the Algonquian-speaking people lived more on the coastal plains, which means they lived by the ocean, okay, so over here more. And then you have the Iroquois that lived more inland, which would be more around inside here, okay? Among the Iroquois groups, there were the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. So among the Iroquois, there are 5 other groups. Together they are known as the Iroquois, or the Five Nations. They lived near the Great Lakes, in what is now Pennsylvania and New York, and the Lake Ontario region of Canada. Iroquois villages. Like other eastern woodland groups, the Iroquois farmed and lived in villages. They built their villages on top of steep hills. To protect against enemies, many Iroquois built palisades, or walls of tall wooden poles, around their villages. Longhouses. The Iroquois lived in shelters called longhouses. These long wooden buildings could hold up to 50 people. Their frames were made by cutting poles from small trees and bending the poles and then covering them with bark. Each longhouse was divided into sections, and each section was home for 1 or 2 families. Near their villages, the Iroquois grew 3 main crops: corn, beans, and squash. The Iroquois called these the 3 sisters because they all 3 were planted in the same field. After a field was farmed for a few years, the soil became less fertile. The Iroquois would clear a field in another location and begin farming there. So the picture at the bottom shows some of what it's talking about. Okay, so you have an illustration. The palisades around the Iroquois village protect the people from attacks by enemies. So you see those here, those fences that are going around protecting people. You have corns, beans, and squash were grown, so you have the people coming in that have harvested the crops. Then you have Iroquois were skilled hunters. You have the men that are coming back from a hunt, okay, that are also preparing their weapons to go hunting. And for today, we are going to stop there. So to recap what we went over, we are doing the Eastern Woodlands. We talked about the game that they like to play. We talked about life in the Eastern Woodlands, where the Eastern Woodlands is located at, how trees are their natural resource, what they like to hunt and gather, the division of labor between the men and the women, who did what. And then finally, we talked about how they built their homes, what their homes were made of, the different groups that are part of the Eastern Woodlands, and the different crops that they harvest.